My name is Umar Asif, and this is a technical breakdown of my vending machine code. I started off with a class named vending machine, then defined two dictionaries named drinks menu and snacks menu, which contain all the item codes, names, and prices. Then we have these other two dictionaries which contain the number of stock of all items in the menus, which is 8. Here I have set the total cost and the user's balance to zero point 0. This keeps track of the cost and remaining balance of the user. Then we move on to the next function, which is called display logo. This function prints a logo, which is an ASCII art. Then we move on to the display menu function. This function displays the menu to the user in this order: item name and price. And it contains an if statement and a for loop. Then moving on to the stock input function. This function takes an input from the user asking for the number of items they would like to buy and shows them the number of items available in the stock menu. I use while true to make sure I get a valid input from the user. And then I also use an int function to make sure I get an integer from the user. Then there's this condition: make sure that the stock entered by the user is within the 1 to 8 range. When the condition is true, the stock is returned to the user. Then I use an else statement that if the user has entered a number not within 1 to 8, it will print an error message telling the user to enter a valid number. And here, if the user enters a non-numerical value, it will print an error message again. Now I'm going to move on to the item selection function. This lets the user make a selection by typing the item code or typing in done to end the selection. After that, I use a while loop, which goes on until the user enters done. This lets the user make as many selections as they wish. Then there's an if statement, which makes sure that the item code entered is actually in the menus and is true. Then I use if and elif statement for the logos. The if statement checks if the menu is for snacks and adds the respected snacks logo. Then the elif statement checks if the menu is for drinks and puts the respected logo for it. Then we move on to the calculations, which is stock. It multiplies the stock by the price of user's selection and then adds it to the total cost. This means if the user chooses to purchase 2 items for 580 each, it will be 20, and that will be added to the total cost. Then it will also take away the stock for the selected item, which is 2, when purchased by the user. Then here it prints that the item purchased by the user has been added to your selection, which is your cart, which is the user's cart. And then it also prints the total cost. Then there's an else statement, which prints an error message if it's an invalid code entered by the user. Then we move on to selection input. Here the user can enter more item codes if they wish, or they could type in done if they wish to end. Here is the function named user's money, which is the first thing the user would be asked. I use while true for an infinite loop to make sure the user enters the right input. Then over here, the user is asked to enter the amount they would like to spend, and I use float for decimal values. Then there's this if statement and a condition. This condition makes sure that the number is non-negative. And then the input entered by the user goes to the user balance. Then I break the while loop, and if the amount is negative, it will print an error message. And then in the last, if it's a non-numerical value, it will also print another error message. Then there's the start purchase function, which basically starts the vending machine. And then I have these ASCII arts. The vending machine is the main one I'm using on top, and the snacks and drinks are used next to the snacks and drinks menus. Now I'll move on to the final part of my code, which is the checkout. This prints a message saying thank you for using the vending machine, hope you had a great experience. But if the total cost is higher than the user's balance, then the message is shown that insufficient funds, your total cost is 80, whatever the number is. Else, user is given change back, which subtracts the total cost of items from user's balance. And then it prints two messages saying the total amount is, and please collect your change.